I never imagined the day my own father would look me in the eyes and decide I was something to hide. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, when his name flashed on the screen. Gad rarely called anymore, not since he'd started his new life with Lydia, the woman he was about to marry. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. His voice was tight, careful, like every word had been rehearsed. "We need to talk about the wedding." My stomach tightened instantly. I already knew this wasn't going to be good. He cleared his throat. "I've been thinking, and it's best if you don't attend." The words landed softly, but the damage was violent. "What?" I laughed nervously. "Dad, stop joking." "I'm serious," he said. "It's a very upscale event. Investors, business partners, important people." There it was, the tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable while saying something cruel. "And I don't fit?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough to confirm everything. "You've had struggles. The divorce, the job changes. I just don't want unnecessary questions." Unnecessary questions. That's what I was now. I stared at the wall, memories flashing through my mind. Him teaching me to ride a bike, cheering at my college graduation, promising he'd always be proud of me. All of it felt fake now. "So you're embarrassed by me," I said quietly. "That's not what I mean," he snapped. "Don't twist this. Lydia agrees it's better this way. She wants the wedding to stay classy." Classy. Funny how classy always meant excluding the people who knew you before the money. I hung up before he could say anything else. I didn't trust myself to speak. Later that night, I checked social media like an idiot. Lydia had already posted a photo of the wedding invitation. Gold lettering, luxury venue, captioned, "A perfect new beginning." I noticed something else, too. Several of the comments were from people I recognized, executives, partners, and one name that made my chest tighten: Mark Halden. Mark wasn't anyone. He was the investor who'd funded Dad's company years ago, the reason my father went from struggling entrepreneur to respected industry figure. And Mark knew me. I'd worked with him briefly during my short time at Dad's company. He'd seen me at my worst and my best. Once he told me, "Your father's success story isn't complete without you." Apparently, Dad didn't agree. The wedding came and went without me. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I told myself I didn't care. But 2 weeks later, something strange happened. Dad showed up at my door unannounced. No confidence, no sharp suit, just panic in his eyes. "She ruined everything," he whispered, like someone might be listening. "Lydia, she destroyed everything I built." And in that moment, I realized being uninvited from the wedding was only the beginning of the betrayal. I didn't know it yet, but the same people Dad tried to impress at his wedding had just turned their backs on him, and Lydia was the reason. I let my father stand there for a full 10 seconds before I stepped aside and let him in. Not because I was kind, but because I was curious. He looked smaller inside my apartment, like the walls stripped away whatever authority he used to carry. His hands shook as he sat down on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like a man waiting for a verdict. "You didn't even invite me to sit at your wedding," I said flatly. "Now you show up here?" He flinched. I deserve that. That surprised me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavy, uncomfortable, filled with everything we hadn't said in years. Finally, he looked up. "Things went wrong. Fast." I crossed my arms. "Start talking." He swallowed. "You remember Mark Halden?" Of course I did. The name still carried weight. "The investor," I said. "He was more than that," Dad replied. He was supposed to expand the company globally. Everything depended on him. I nodded slowly. And? And Livia, he hesitated, rubbing his temples. She insisted on being involved, said she needed to protect the brand. That phrase again, brand, image, class. She started reviewing staff, contracts, meetings. She wanted control. I almost laughed. She married you 2 months ago. She acted like she owned everything, he said bitterly, including me. I leaned against the counter, listening. I wasn't angry yet, just alert. What did she do? I asked. Dad exhaled sharply. At the wedding reception, she cornered Mark, told him she'd be streamlining operations, said she didn't trust people who had emotional ties to the company. My stomach tightened. Emotional ties? He nodded. She mentioned you. That stung more than I expected. She told him you were unstable, Dad continued, voice cracking, that I'd been forced to support you financially for years, that keeping you away from the wedding proved I was finally cutting loose weak links. I stared at him. You let her say that? I didn't know, he said quickly, not until later. I turned away, suddenly unable to look at him. Mark had always valued loyalty. He built businesses on trust, not appearances, and Lydia had just handed him a very clear picture of who my father had become. She humiliated him, Dad said quietly, told him she'd be making future decisions without consulting outsiders. Outsiders, I repeated. By Monday, Mark pulled out, no warning, no negotiation, just gone. The room felt colder. And now? I asked. Dad laughed bitterly. Now suppliers are nervous, partners are backing away, people think I've lost control. I turned back to him. Because you have. He didn't argue. I tried calling you, he said, but you didn't answer. You didn't want me at your wedding. Why would you want me now? He looked up at me then, eyes wet. Because Mark asked about you. That made me freeze. He asked why you weren't there, Dad said, and when Lydia explained, Mark said something I can't stop hearing. I waited. He said, if you're ashamed of your own child, you'll betray anyone. The words echoed in my chest. I suddenly understood something terrifying. This wasn't just about a wedding, or a marriage, or even a business deal. This was about the moment my father chose image over integrity, and how everyone else saw it before he did. And Lydia? She wasn't done yet. What I didn't know was that Lydia had already made another move behind my father's back, one that would turn his company against him and force me into a decision I never wanted to make. I didn't sleep that night. After my father left, I sat alone on the couch, staring at the dark reflection of myself in the TV screen. His words kept looping in my head. If you're ashamed of your own child, you'll betray anyone. It wasn't just something Mark said. It was the truth Dad had been running from. The next morning, I woke up to an email that made my hands go cold. Subject: regarding company restructuring. It wasn't sent to me directly. It had been forwarded anonymously. The sender? Lydia. The recipients? Every senior manager at my father's company. I read it twice, then a third time. Lydia had announced an immediate restructuring, claiming it was necessary to restore investor confidence. She criticized legacy relationships, accused certain executives of emotional bias, and, worst of all, positioned herself as the final authority on all decisions. She signed it as Lydia Hale, Executive Director. Executive Director? She didn't have that title. She'd never earned that title. My phone buzzed immediately. It was Jason, one of the few people at the company who still talked to me. "Did you see it?" he asked, barely saying hello. "I just did," I replied. "She's staging a takeover," he said, barely saying hello. "Your dad doesn't even know yet." That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not anger, not revenge, but clarity. I drove to the office. No badge, no title, no invitation. Just the same building I'd once walked into with pride, now guarded by uncertainty. People stared when I entered. Some whispered, some looked away. But others, people I'd worked with, nodded, relieved, like seeing a familiar face in a burning house. I found my father in the conference room. He was surrounded by printed emails, his face pale, hands clenched. "She sent it without telling me," he said the moment he saw me. "She says it was necessary." I placed my phone on the table. "You need to read the replies." He hesitated, then scrolled. One executive questioned her authority, another demanded a board vote, a third resigned on the spot. The final email stopped him cold. It was from Mark. "I warned you," Mark wrote. "This is what happens when loyalty is treated as weakness. I won't reconsider until your company remembers what it stands for." My father's shoulders slumped. "I wanted to look successful," he whispered. "I wanted to look untouchable." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. "You wanted to look better than who you really were." That hurt him more than shouting ever could. Before he could respond, the door opened. Lydia walked in, confident, smiling, dressed like she owned the place. "Oh," she said lightly, "you're here." She looked at me like I was an inconvenience, a stain that wouldn't wash out. "You shouldn't be," she added. "This is a business matter." I met her gaze. "Funny, you married into it." Her smile tightened. She turned to my father. "I handled it. They respect decisiveness." "They're resigning," he said. She waved it off. "Weak people always do." That was when I realized something terrifying. Lydia didn't care if the company survived. She cared about control, and she was willing to burn everything, including my father, to prove she deserved it. As I watched him sit there, silent and broken, I understood the real betrayal wasn't just what he'd done to me. It was what he'd allowed someone else to do to all of us. What Lydia didn't expect was that her email had exposed something far bigger and forced the board to make a move that would drag my father's darkest secret into the open. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. By Thursday night, the company felt like a funeral home, quiet, tense, full of people pretending they weren't afraid. Word had spread fast. Lydia's email wasn't just reckless, it was proof that someone without authority was making executive decisions. And the board noticed. I wasn't supposed to be there. No one invited me. But at 8:57 a.m., my phone buzzed with a single message from an unknown number. "Be in the building. Today matters." I didn't ask who sent it. I already knew. The boardroom doors were closed when I arrived. Through the glass, I could see my father seated at the far end of the table, hands folded, eyes down. Lydia sat beside him, confident as ever, whispering into his ear like a strategist guiding a king who no longer understood the game. The doors opened. "Bring her in," one of the board members said. I stepped inside. Lydia's head snapped toward me. Why is she here? No one answered her. Mark Haldon stood up. "I requested it," he said calmly. "If we're discussing trust, we need all the context." My father looked at me, shocked. "You didn't tell me." "I wasn't asked." Lydia laughed, sharp and dismissive. "This is absurd. She has no role here." Mark didn't even look at her. "Actually, she does." The room went still. "Years ago," Mark continued, "your daughter was the one who flagged irregular accounting in our early expansion. She saved this company from legal trouble before any of you knew it existed." I saw several board members exchange looks. Lydia's smile finally faded. "That was years ago. She's irrelevant now." "That's interesting," another board member said, sliding a folder across the table, "because according to these documents, the irregularities are back." My father stiffened. "What?" "Unauthorized role assignments, unapproved restructuring, false titles," the board member said, eyes cutting toward Lydia. "All since the wedding." Lydia stood abruptly. "You're twisting this." "No," Mark said quietly, "you're exposing it." Then came the blow no one saw coming. "We also uncovered something else, something your daughter warned us about years ago, but your father chose to ignore." My father looked at me, confused. I swallowed. "Dad, I tried to tell you." The room held its breath. "The success you've been selling was partially built on deferred risks, risks your daughter identified and documented, risks Lydia just accelerated." Silence. Lydia laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous. You can't blame me for his past decisions." Mark turned to her. "No, but we can hold you accountable for exploiting them." The board voted. Unanimously, Lydia was removed from any involvement with the company, effective immediately. Security escorted her out. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She looked at my father one last time and said, "You needed me to stay relevant." Then she walked out. My father sat frozen. The company wasn't saved, but it wasn't lost either. And for the first time, he looked at me, not as an embarrassment, not as a liability, but as someone he should have listened to all along. Still, something was missing, because removing Lydia didn't erase what my father had done, and I wasn't sure forgiveness was something I could offer. What my father said to me after the board meeting shocked everyone and forced me to choose between walking away forever or stepping into a role I never wanted. The boardroom emptied slowly, like no one wanted to be the first to leave the wreckage behind. I stayed seated while others filtered out, my thoughts heavy. The company had survived, barely. Lydia was gone. The immediate crisis was contained, but none of that erased the hollow feeling in my chest. My father stood at the window, staring down at the city he once believed he'd conquered. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. I didn't respond. He turned around. "Not just for the wedding, for years." That got my attention, but not in the way he expected. "Apologies don't rewind time," I said. "They don't undo choices." "I know," he replied, "but I need you to hear it anyway." He sat across from me, no desk between us now, no titles, no power. "I was afraid,"
he admitted. Afraid that if people saw your struggles, they'd question my success, so I hid you. I flinched, even though I already knew. I thought image was everything, he continued, and Lydia, she encouraged that thinking. She made me believe cutting emotional ties made me stronger. I met his eyes. It made you smaller. He nodded. I see that now. There was a long pause before he spoke again. The board wants you back, he said. I almost laughed. Back where? In the company. Senior role. Oversight. They trust you. That's convenient, now that everything's on fire. He didn't deny it. They also said something else, he added. If you refuse, Mark walks away for good. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing that. So I'm leverage again? No, he said quickly. You're the only one who can fix what I broke. I stood up. I didn't break it. You did. The moment you chose to be ashamed of me. His eyes filled with tears. I lost my family before I lost my company, and I didn't even notice. That hurt more than anger ever could. I won't work for you, I said after a moment, and I won't be your shield. He nodded, bracing himself. But, I continued, I'll help rebuild on my terms. Hope flickered in his eyes. I want transparency, I said. Real accountability, no image games. And if you ever put reputation above people again, I walk. He agreed without hesitation. As I turned to leave, he said, You know Lydia filed something this morning. I stopped. She's claiming wrongful removal, and she's accusing you of influencing the board. I exhaled slowly. Of course she is. Because people like Lydia never disappear quietly. And this wasn't the end. It was the calm before the final collapse. Lydia's retaliation didn't come through lawyers or lawsuits. It came through a secret she leaked that threatened to destroy my father's reputation permanently.
The news broke on a Monday morning. Not through a court filing, not through a legal notice, through a headline. CEO's rise built on concealed internal failures, sources say. I read it 3 times before the meaning fully sank in. Lydia hadn't gone after the company. She'd gone after my father's identity. My phone started ringing immediately. Board members, journalists, former employees, everyone wanted the same thing: confirmation. Dad sat across from me in his office, staring at the article like it was written in a foreign language. She leaked the internal reports, he said hoarsely. The ones from years ago. The ones I had written. The warnings I had given him back when I was still desperate for his approval. They're framing it like I hid everything, he continued, like I lied my way to the top. I didn't correct him, because part of that was true. Lydia had taken the reports and twisted the narrative, painting herself as the whistleblower and my father as the villain who silenced internal voices, especially mine. What are you going to do? I asked. He looked at me. I don't know. For the first time in my life, my father didn't have a plan. I closed my laptop and stood. Then I will. That afternoon, I requested a press briefing. The board hesitated. The lawyers panicked. But Mark backed me. She's already controlling the story, he said. Let the truth speak for itself. The room was packed. Cameras, microphones, skepticism. I walked up to the podium alone. I'm not here as a representative of the company. I'm here as the daughter who was once hidden to protect an image. A murmur rippled through the room. I told them everything. How I'd written the reports, how my father ignored them, how Lydia exploited them, and how being excluded from the wedding wasn't an accident, it was a symptom. I didn't protect him, and I didn't destroy him either. I told the truth. By the time I finished, the room was silent. One reporter asked, "Why speak now?" I answered honestly, because pretending success means pretending people don't matter, and that lie finally caught up with us. That night, the narrative shifted. Lydia's claims unraveled, the company stabilized, my father's reputation bruised but real. He came to my apartment again, not to beg, not to panic, to thank you, he said. I didn't do it for you, I replied. I know. That's why it matters. We stood there, awkward and fragile, like strangers learning each other again. For the first time, my father didn't ask me to hide. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to earn my place. But there was still one thing left. One final decision. When my father made his last request, I had to decide whether rebuilding meant staying or finally walking away for good. The request came a week later, not in a meeting, not through lawyers, just a quiet dinner invitation from my father. No assistance, no agenda, no speeches prepared in advance. We sat across from each other in a small restaurant he used to take me to when I was a teenager, back when success was something he chased, not something he protected. I've been offered a chance to stay on as chairman, he said after a while. Advisory only, no control. I nodded. And I want you to take my place as CEO. The words hung between us. A year ago, that offer would have felt like justice, proof that I was finally enough, that being excluded from the wedding was a mistake the universe corrected. But now, it felt like a test. I don't want it, I said calmly. He looked stunned. You earned it. I earned my peace, not your legacy. His shoulders slumped, but he didn't argue. I spent years trying to prove I wasn't embarrassing, and you spent years believing success meant erasing anything that didn't fit the picture. I reached across the table, not in anger, but in closure. I forgive you, but I won't stay. His eyes filled. Then what happens to us? I smiled softly. We start being honest, without contracts, without image. The next morning, I resigned publicly, declining the role, recommending a qualified internal candidate, and stepping away completely. The headlines were brutal, then respectful, then forgotten. But something else happened. My story became mine again. Months later, I ran into Mark by accident. He told me the company survived. Not stronger, not bigger, just real. As for Lydia, her lawsuit failed. Her credibility didn't survive the truth. And my father?
he still calls me, not to manage crises, not to hide mistakes, just to talk. I wasn't too embarrassing for his wedding. He was just too afraid to be seen as human. And in walking away, I finally stopped living in his shadow and started standing in my own light.